everyone, and welcome to the first ever side order discussion. At the time of recording this video, we are done with the game in terms of 1000%. We're still playing it more. We got some challenge runs to do, but I think it's time to start ranking things, to do a review and other discussions on side order. If you're looking forward to that, be sure to subscribe for more. And let's start with ranking all the subs and specials to see what you should be picking up. Now, I would put Splat Bomb at a solid S tier. I think what's important to note for sub-weapons is that using them can be a bit tricky if you're not investing your palette into them, which of course takes away from other options. So you do need to be really careful with when you use it. Ink consumption is a big deal here, and it's something you have to build around. That being said, it does have some benefits from palettes. You can make the explosion bigger, which is really good. And on its own, even with no upgrades, it's plenty solid. It does good damage. It blows up fast. It makes it a nice get-off-me tool against enemies. It's just overall a very solid bomb. Suction Bomb, I put slightly below that. It's mostly the same, but I would say the main downside is it blowing up less makes it a lot less of a safety option if you do get swarmed. I think the faster explosion time really is worth an entire tier of difference, but besides that, there's practically nothing else to note. Burst Bomb, I would say, would go into S tier. I'd probably have it a little bit lower than Splat Bomb. I think it's a bit better since it's a bit cheaper. Pretty easy to use in that case, and the burst damage is very useful, so it's a lot easier to mix it in with other weapons, but it doesn't have quite the same impact as Splat Bomb, mainly just in terms of DPS. Like if you're trying to just get that extra shred on a portal, it's not going to do the job for you. Curling will go into B tier. Originally, I thought it was one of the worst subs, but I think it's a little bit better than some of the options on this list. It still can help you with your movement a little bit. It is still able to have an explosion. Some of the perks, like bigger explosions, can help it. Subsaver stacks pretty well on it. I think it's okay, all things considered, and it being a movement tool is not bad. It has some uses. Ink Mine would go into C tier for me. I really don't like Mine here. Mine does, in theory, have an advantage of it being a deployable that you could put down and it helps you out. But really, I think if it's helping you out, you're going to have to place it more anyway, which makes it take a lot of your time. And if not, it's just not doing anything. You can only have two of them at the same time anyway. I just don't think it's really that useful. I'm not really a big fan of the Ink Mine. I think it's one of the weaker ones so far. Next up is Sprinkler. So, I'm going to spoil the rest of the subs. This is in its own tier. I think Sprinkler is the best sub in side order. It's very difficult to break for a lot of enemies, so it can stay up for a while. You can leave it up for a long time. It'll hold a zone. It'll damage anything that goes near you. It'll keep paint. It'll get you specials. It's cheap, so it's not hard to use. And it's just very solid. The main thing that's underrated is the damage output, and it's really solid for that damage. And I think especially just, you can put it up and leave it, and it's totally fine. If you put this on like a wall especially, and have it paint, you can just camp by the Sprinkler. And it does slow down, but even then, it gets to its slowest speed in like 23 seconds. So you can just leave it. Now, as an extra note, it is true that some abilities can stack with the other subs way better than Sprinkler, like explosion damage and radius can turn other bombs really insane. But if you don't have a color chip bias hack or are doing a low hacks run or are maybe just playing a weapon that doesn't want to spec into it, I don't think it's that good an option. So if you're playing something like Blaster that benefits from the explosion radius buff, then yeah, the other bombs could be better in that case. But I think the majority of the time, having a sub that doesn't need any investment to be good right from the start is a bit better than having a sub that could scale better, which wouldn't be something you would be able to get in a lot of runs anyway. Mist is a solid B tier for me. It's okay. It has some use cases, like against the really fast enemy objectives, it's insanely broken, and it does have some perks with some of the palettes, like it's slowing you down. But besides that, it is still just kind of okay. Slowing enemies is alright, and if you have the right perks, it works. But I think a lot of the times there are just better options. Though I can't deny that in the right situations, Mist can feel really nice. In fact, I'd probably put Mist above Curling, but I wouldn't put it in A tier. Wall is the worst sub. I used Wall for a little bit, and it just barely tanks anything anyway. It's very minimal. It doesn't really do, like, any form of damage. It's really bad. It's really, really bad. It can save you sometimes, which is the only reason it's here compared to mine. But I have no idea why they put Wall in. It's just not good. And I think Fizzy Bomb would be another S tier. I would put it above Splat Bomb. It's just a little bit more useful. You know, it doesn't have the same DPS as Splat Bomb since you have the charge time, and it's not as cheap as a burst, but you get a little bit of both. And you get a movement tool too, so it's nice compared to curling. If you want a bomb, I think it's your best choice. The flexibility is really useful. I think that its DPS is solid if you need it. I like your ability to paint and move. The extra throwing range is nice. It works, and it's cheaper. It can fit a lot more situations, and I enjoy it for that. So that is where I would put all the sub-weapons for me. I think that is where it is, and now it's time to move on to the specials. I would put Trizuka in A. Now, for the specials, I will preface, compared to the subs, I think that all of the specials are pretty useful. Like, the worst special is still pretty decent. Zuka is solid for DPS. If you invest in explosion chips, it's really good for that. However, I think specials that double as a way to save your life are so important right now. It's so nice to have an option to stall, especially if it's long enough to bring your armor back, especially when you have less hacks. And so the inability to do that, to me, bumps it down. And while it still has solid damage, there are specials that protect you and can do damage. Rain I would also put in a solid A tier. I think it's a little bit better than Zuka. Depending on the weapon you have, Rain's healing ability is really good. It's a lot of area of effect, and you keep your gun while it's active, which is nice. That being said, it's still not as good a protection. Like, it's better than Zuka. It does still help, since you can heal while you're shooting, which does help you a lot. But I just don't think it's as good as specials that will actually keep you alive. I would put Booyah Bomb in a solid S tier. So Booyah Bomb, I think, is one of the better protection specials in the game because one, you get the throw mode and it's very useful, but two, when you go in the air with your Booyah Bomb, there is extremely little that can actually target you in the air. So all the enemies kind of just stop and you get a lot of time to recover. And especially if you have stuff like Poison Ink, you can literally just watch them all go and take damage while you're sitting in the sky. And then Booyah DPS is solid. Like, it's not as insane as something like Shrike or Crab or Zuka, but for doubling as a protection option, I think it's totally worth it. So having both utilities combined makes it pretty good. I guess I'd put Wave in B. I think Wave is okay. Some of the chips are nice for it, and it can do a lot of damage if you're being swarmed, but it's very limited in its utility. I think it helps you a little bit, but compared to the other specials, it just doesn't do that much more than anything else I'm seeing. So I think it's all right. It's not useless, but it could be a lot better. Stamp would be my first X tier special. I don't think it's the best one, but it's pretty good. It doesn't give you HP, but the hammer mode really knocks people away or blocks for you pretty well. So against most options, not all of them, most options, Stamp is going to do well at protecting you, and its DPS is insane. The throw mode is okay. It does okay damage for what it is, but it's really easy to Stamp DPS things. You have to be a little careful not to get greedy. You can very rarely get punished. It's also nice to move. Like, you can use the rush mode as an option to kind of run around the map as well. So that's pretty good. And because you can throw it, if you're running a lot of special charge, it's very easy to just, oh, I have 2 charge up items on the ground, I can just throw it and get more. I don't think it's the best, but I think it's pretty good. I think its only problems are that it doesn't protect you completely, and you have to be up close to get the damage. I would put Whale in low A tier. I debated putting it higher, but honestly, it's not bad. The main perk it has over all these other specials to me is global range. Whale can be used on something regardless of where you are. The targeting is still a bit tricky. Its damage isn't amazing, but the ability to just pop it wherever you are and target anything, especially dealing with longer range opponents, I think gives it a lot more utility than it's given credit for. Crab Tank is what I think is the best special in side order though. It does have a little bit of limited movement, but it's a pretty fast panic button, and if you don't need it as a panic button, Crab's AoE mode pierces, so you do insane damage, and because it's an explosion it can stack, and then it's shredding standard fire mode, while not as good as something like Strike, just still is so good at shredding so much stuff, and you still get the utility of a special that can keep you alive. The ball form is really, really good for staying in it, and with its duration, you can often just regen your entire armor when it's broken and just have another one. It's so strong for that. Reef Slider, I think I'd put above Wave Breaker, but I really don't like Slider. I think that Slider is a special that can be seen as a lot better. It is the fastest panic button on this list, and it does get you far away. but it lasts so little that if your armor is broken, you're not going to get it back by the time it blows up, so you might be in more trouble afterward. The explosion damage is okay, but honestly, its DPS really isn't that great. I think it's okay. It has some use cases. It's definitely better than Wave, but I think there are just so many other options that do its job better. If you want damage, survivability, or both, there's just easier options out there that are going to be more reliable and a lot easier to use. Strikes I would put into S tier. I don't think it's as good as Booyah since Booyah keeps you alive, but Strike DPS is insane, and if you're running a chip build to cycle Strike repeatedly, the amount of times you can just throw insane damage is crazy. There are some situations where it doesn't help you. There are some things you can go against where you need survivability, but anytime you're against stuff that doesn't need it, and especially if you're willing to spec into damage builds and special cycling, Strike can be absolutely crazy. So, it is the best DPS type special in the game, but it's lacking in other utility, and I don't want to spoil it, but especially some stuff toward the end of the game that Strike really doesn't help against, and you do not want to lose a run at the point where you don't have a special that actually helps you. So, I think that downside is enough to put it below other specials. So I'm going to put Kraken in A tier, actually below Inkstorm. This might be seen as pretty surprising because I've been talking up the survivability a lot, but honestly, I think Kraken is the weakest one at it. Like, first off, its startup is really long, which means that compared to the other startup options, it's actually most likely to not activate in time. You can stay in Kraken long enough to get your armor back, but outside of that, it struggles a bit more. It doesn't do as much damage. It can't hit portals when it's really high a lot of the time. It can struggle at hitting anything that isn't ground level. The knockback means if you're on edges, you have to be careful of being knocked off the map. It's a survivability tool, but you very rarely get a lot more out of it. Like, at most, you're just charging a bunch of lessers, but pretty much everything higher is going to be clearing them better anyway. And honestly, like, the other specials have HP, but how often have you had, like, your Booyah or Crab armor shredded? The difference between HP and invincibility just is not that high. So I don't think it's that big a difference anyway. And in that case, having a faster startup by like 20 to 30 frames is a huge, huge difference that I would rather have. Finally is Triple Splashdown. Now, Triple Splashdown is what I had the hardest one to rank. I think I would put it right below Kraken. So, Triple Splashdown can help you to survive, but like with Reef Slider, if your armor is broken, you are not landing with broken armor. I don't think Splashdown canceling is a big deal. It can happen, but I very rarely see it happen. Actually, I'd put it down. I'd put it below Zuka as well. It has a little bit of more help survivability, but not that much. It's good DPS, but not as good as other options. And the main downside is you have to be right next to everyone to use it. Like, if you're Splashdowning, you have to be directly on top of something. Which, Stamp has that downside too, but you can throw Stamp, Stamp protects you better, Stamp can run away, Stamp has more DPS in general, so like, why would I ever want it? I think the main perk is just that it is pretty fast, startup-wise, since you're going into the air, and I think the multiple explosions clear a bigger area than Slider does generally. It's also a little bit more damage, so I think it's a bit more useful in that case, but honestly, it's not as high as I think it should be. Its DPS is a lot lower than I thought. So yeah, that would be my ranking. Best kit in side order is Sprinkler and Crab. Don't at me. That's my thoughts, very early of course. Maybe things will change down the line, but thank you guys so much for watching and have a good one.